When the city grew, farming was pushed to the edges of the urban center, and these fields were covered with residences. Archaeologist Dolph Widmer has studied Teotihuacan for more than a decade.
Well, one of the amazing things about Teotihuacan is that it's a city, and even though right now it's an agricultural field, it's just, you see cactus everywhere, you can still tell it's a city because the surface of the ground is littered with artifacts. They're everywhere. We can see that we have a site. Here I have cultural material like this piece of obsidian, have piece of ceramics. All this stuff here tells me that people lived here. And by noting the artifacts on the surface, I can get an idea of how big their residences were, how many residents there were in the city as a whole, and get some idea of the size and number of people that lived here.
During the 1960s, archaeologists surveyed the entire city, revealing an urban grid as deliberate as the streets of Manhattan. A total of 2,600 buildings lined densely packed streets. 80% of these were residential compounds. These compounds enclosed numerous sleeping rooms, patios, and kitchens. Archaeologists estimate that 30 to 100 people could be housed in a single compound. Were these like modern apartment buildings, where strangers lived together by chance? Or was there a thread of kinship connecting the residents of these large compounds? What clues were left behind of Teotihuacan's families? Archaeologist Michael Spence.
We usually bury in cemeteries, set apart from the places where the people lived. That makes it difficult to tie them back into their living quarters. In Teotihuacan, fortunately, the people were buried within the apartment compound. Some of them were buried in open spaces like patios. These would have been particularly important individuals. But many of them were buried under the floors of the rooms that they had actually lived in. So in Teotihuacan, we have the possibility of using these skeletons to try and detect relationships within the apartment compound.
Thousands of boxes line the walls of a laboratory in Mexico's National Anthropology Museum. This is where skeletal remains from excavations at Teotihuacan and other sites are stored. Looking for evidence of ancient kinship, Spence came here to analyze 81 skeletons from a single residential compound known as La Ventilla.
Well, I analyzed them for a series of traits, about a dozen traits. These traits we think are partially genetic in origin, not completely, but partially. And hopefully by analyzing these traits, we might be able to say something about the relationships between individuals in the population. For example, you see this hole here over the eye. Some vessels passed through that hole, and we think that that's perhaps partially genetic. On this skeleton, this is a female, you can see a notch instead. So the vessels are passing through a notch. And that's one variation. There are others. Here, for example, in this mandible, you can see a groove running along here, but it's covered over by a bridge. On this one, let's see, there's the groove, but there's no bridge.
Comparing the bones from La Ventilla, Spence came upon some startling results. Similar traits recurred frequently among the male skeletons. For example, 18 out of 20 male skulls had a hole directly over the eye socket.
I think this means that La Ventilla then, the social group occupying La Ventilla, was based on a core of related males, related male kinsmen, and that the females in the area had married in there from a variety of different places.
So the 2,000 compounds of Teotihuacan were not apartment buildings filled with strangers, but the households of large kin groups. 30 to 100 relatives all living together. great-grandparents, grandparents, brothers, uncles, cousins. This kind of extended family is what is called a lineage.
A lineage is a group of people related either through the male line or the female line, but it's more than just that. These people usually live together, they will work together, they often own land in common, and they'll probably have some identity as a distinct religious group too.
Were the lineages of Teotihuacan unified by religion? Again, household excavations provided answers. Physical anthropologist Rebecca Story.
In all the compounds that have been excavated, there has always been a central courtyard, and in the middle of it, we generally find some kind of architectural feature. Now, in this particular compound, it's a very elaborate and very beautiful one. Look at the detailing on the stone, and also look at the little ornaments on top of it. There are fragments to show us that it once was plastered and painted, so we have to remember that it would have been completely brighter and much more colorful and really looked splendid.
These strange and splendid structures were altars, but who was being worshipped here? In 1980, Rebecca Story and Dolph Widmer excavated a residential compound in a neighborhood of the city now called Tlahinga. The evidence showed people had lived in the compound for close to 500 years. Underneath the central altar, archaeologists discovered several skeletons buried decades apart.
When we excavated under the central courtyards of Tlahinga, we found a series of human burials. Now, Tlahinga was actually a rather modest compound, probably people we would think of as relatively poor in the whole city, and yet the most elaborate offerings that were found with anybody were with these individuals. This person here was buried with an awful lot of marine shell, including a beautiful headdress made out of very elaborate rattlesnake pattern.
Marine shell was an expensive item for the ancient residents because it had to be imported. It took days of travel on foot to bring goods like these from the coast to the city.
This means that all through the history of the Tlahinga compound, individuals, important individuals, were buried with a lot of ceremony and a lot of elaborate offerings under the altar. And it was quite clear that they were fairly old from several pieces of evidence, including from this jaw. For instance, you can see this individual has lost all their teeth. They have filled back in because they were lost quite some time ago. I could also tell from the sex that they were practically all males except for one female. Putting all the evidence together of the age, the sex of the individuals, and the elaborate offerings, it looks like they were very important people in the compound who were buried in a special place with a lot of reverence and ceremony and wealth. That means probably that they were heads or other important people in the compound, and they were placed on the altar deliberately so that they could be venerated or worshipped by the residents of the compound as ancestors.
This is Wewe Teotl, the god of the hearth, protector of the household's fertility and well-being. This icon was found along with the ancestor burials in the central courtyard of Tlahinga. The evidence of altars and burials showed that ancestor worship played a fundamental role in organizing the lineage compound. Like Teotihuacan, many cultures throughout the world have been organized by lineages, from the Iroquois of North America to the Nuer of East Africa to the Chinese. But why did the lineage members at Teotihuacan live together in a single household? In a laboratory at Teotihuacan, Dolph Widmer measures potsherds thousands of years old. His team collected more than 1 million of these at Tlahinga. Measuring the fragments, Widmer discovers a remarkable similarity in size. Looking for explanations, he examined the methods of modern potters. Here, within the outskirts of the ancient city in the neighborhood of San Sebastian, a handful of potters still use ancient techniques.
Bueno, viene siendo de, no sé si se puede decir,
I learned how to do pottery from my grandparents and from my great-grandparents.
Yo me fui fijando cómo trabajaban ellos. Y desde ahí empecé
I watched how
a
they
trabajarlo
worked.
también de pequeño.
I started when I was very small.
Más chiquitos empezamos a trabajar esto.
Oliverio Hernandez Resendiz is one of the few remaining potters in San Sebastian. He makes large pots that are used primarily for cooking. Resendiz works with molds, enabling him to work quickly while keeping the size and shape of the pots consistent. The use of molds explains why the remains found in Tlahinga were so uniform.
It tells us that we're dealing with a specialized production of ceramics. Not simply a whole range of ceramics for use in the compound, but instead what we're finding is they're making one or two types and making lots and lots of them. The thing about the ceramic production is it's basically simple. You take clay, you make the shape, and then you fire, you sell it. But as simple as that process is, it requires people for all the steps.
Young and old, male and female, every member of the household can be involved in pottery production. Children can move pots from the drying area to the kilns. Elderly people can sell the finished pots in the marketplace.
What's interesting is when we think of this kind of specialized production, we think of it in terms of industrial scale. That is in workshops or factories that are located away from residences. Here it's different. These activities, as far as we know, take place within the compound, within the family, larger family grouping, within the lineage structure.
The lineage compound of Tlahinga made thousands of these pots. Their neighbors specialized in other goods, like obsidian blades and clay figurines. Archaeologists have detected craft workshops in more than 800 compounds. In contrast to the relative self-sufficiency of the households in Siren and Copan, Teotihuacanos were engaged in a web of trading. Teotihuacan households were large because they were not only providing for themselves, but producing goods for the marketplace. Teotihuacan is known for its achievements in crafts and architecture, but economic growth causes strains on kin relations. The lineage ties which bound the households of Teotihuacan through worship and work were frayed by increasing wealth.
Probably through time, as some lineages got wealthier than others, then all of a sudden some people would probably attach themselves to a wealthy lineage that they weren't related to just in order to work with them and have a better life than they could if they stayed with just their own lineage. This kind of thing happens, I think, all the time.
Over time, the interior design of the house compounds changed. Wealthier household members enlarged their rooms and painted them with elegant murals, while others in the household saw their living space shrink.
It's getting less egalitarian. You're getting more stratification, more division into what you would call social class, the wealthy and powerful, and then those that work for the wealthy and powerful in essence.
What happens when a society becomes divided by wealth? When some people get richer and some get poorer? How do households change? These faces are the legacy of Rome. the wealthiest and most powerful society of the ancient world. From the grandeur of the Colosseum to the glory of the Senate, the Roman Empire paraded its opulence. But the empire was upheld by a society that spanned the extremes of wealth and poverty. How did these differences affect Roman households? As in Cyrene, natural disaster preserved a window onto ancient daily life. Mount Vesuvius looms over the Bay of Naples, a constant threat to those who live around it. On the 24th of August in the year AD 79, one of its victims was the ancient town of Pompeii.
Vesuvio monte, pluribus locis, latissimae flammae.
Over Mount Vesuvius, a fearful cloud, rent by forked and quivering bursts of flame, turned the day blacker and denser than night.
Multi ad Deus manus tolere.
Many besought the aid of the gods, but still more imagined there were no gods left, and that the universe was plunged into eternal darkness forevermore.
Thousands died, unable to escape from the lethal blasts of scalding ash and stone. For 1,500 years, Pompeii lay buried. In 1729, a well digger accidentally struck the stones of an ancient street. The discovery triggered the longest ongoing excavation in archaeological history. Walking through the cobbled streets, Pompeii seems abandoned just yesterday. Monuments to emperors still dominate the central forum. The graffiti of candidates still scream from the walls. Like Cyrene in El Salvador, Pompeii preserved a snapshot of daily life. Roman scholar Andrew Wallace Hadrill.
I'm interested in ways of recapturing a picture of Roman society as a whole. We've got great written sources for the Romans, but with them there's always a suspicion that they represent the viewpoint of a thin upper crust. The great thing about Pompeii is that archaeologically it preserves the full social spectrum from rich to poor. If you look at a standard plan of any part of Pompeii, what you see is an extraordinary jumble of lines. And it's not until you start measuring and analysing that a pattern emerges. What I've done is to group the houses according to size, from largest to smallest. What comes out is a jigsaw of tiny shops right next door to enormous mansions. Here we have a shop, one of dozens up and down Pompeii. The way the eruption preserves things means you can tell exactly what was in these bins. Beans, chickpeas, lentils. In fact, this guy was a grocer. The backyard here is full of empties. Amphorae, which contained wine, olive oil, and garum, the unspeakable fish sauce which they smothered their food with. Tens of thousands of these amphorae all around Pompeii. It must have been a terrific problem. These are the Coke cans of the ancient world. What do you do to get rid of them? One of the answers is you crunch them up and make floors out of them. There's more to this house than bins and empties. As well as being a place of work, a shop, it's also a place for a family, a place for living. And you can see this the moment you come into the kitchen. Here's the stove, the hearth on which the family could prepare its food. And above the hearth, we find something very characteristic, a lararium, a little shrine where the spirits of the household, the lares, dance on either side of an altar where an offering is made. So this is not just a place for food preparation, but is a focus for the loyalties of the family and family life. What we see in this house then, with its combination of rather shabby shop rooms and surprisingly nicely decorated private rooms, is something very typical of a Roman house. We make a separation between work and family, between office and home. For the Romans, the two, not just here, but all over Pompeii, you find work and home tightly linked together.
These tombstone engravings depict the daily lives of shopkeepers and artisans. Just as in Cyrene and Copan, production in the Roman world was based primarily in the household. Yet, as in Teotihuacan, Roman households specialized in providing goods and services. These households represented the middle levels of Roman society. But what set Rome apart was the extraordinary wealth of its elite.
What we have here is a really magnificent house, built in a prime position over the city walls, looking out over the Bay of Naples, and built on 3 levels, almost tumbling over the walls. It's obviously the house of an extremely wealthy person.
As in Teotihuacan, the elite of ancient Rome paraded their wealth on the walls of their homes.
Framed by this sort of confectionery of columns, you have a great panel picture of 3 gods, suitable company for the great master. We've got a backdrop, and the function of the backdrop is to set the scene and to create a suitable stage on which the owner can perform. The owner may be sitting here holding court. That could be helping his clients, helping his friends and dependents. It might also be actually judging cases, literally holding court. Right next to the big room with the bay window is this much smaller room. And its shape and its decoration tell you a lot about how it could be used. The shape provides just enough room for the 3 couches of the standard Roman dining room, the triclinium.
Dining for the wealthy Roman was more than a meal. It was an event. A wealthy Roman home had not just 1, but 2, 3, 4, even 10 dining rooms.
For us, the dining room's a place for the family to meet. Here, what's vital is the entertaining of guests. It's a great privilege to be invited, and it's at the dinner party in the evening that power is built up, contacts are made, men exchange not just drink and food, but ideas and deals with each other.
Wealthy Romans flaunted their fortunes in orgies of food and wine. Their decadence became a target of literary scorn, as in the Satyricon of Petronius. I am really ashamed to relate what followed. It was so unheard of a piece of luxury. The preliminary course was served in very elegant style. Among the hors d'oeuvres, white olives on one side, black olives on the other. Sausages, too, smoking hot on a silver grill. Syrian plums and pomegranate seeds. Our host toasted, "Fragile life's thread, and brief our day, so drink and make merry while you may." But there was a dark side to these displays of wealth. Hidden within the grand villas of ancient Pompeii were dozens of small rooms. These were the rooms of slaves.
To have a powerful house, it's not enough to have the grand rooms. A vital part is the slave quarters. And it's almost as important to have those cramped and bustling quarters behind scenes as the grand rooms in front.
A dozen, 100, as many as 400 slaves could work for a single household. Who were these slaves? Where did they come from? The Romans gained control of Aspis, wrote the Roman historian Polybius. In full force, the army marched out to plunder the countryside. They destroyed many houses, captured a large amount of spoils, and took more than 20,000 slaves back to the ships. Beginning in 510 BC, Roman armies spiraled outwards, conquering ever vaster territories. Greeks, Egyptians, Gauls, Mauritanians all fell under the sweep of the empire. Hundreds of thousands of prisoners of war were torn from their home countries. They became the slaves of the conquerors. The number of slaves was astounding. An estimated 1 out of every 3 people living in the empire. Their lives were hard. They could be beaten, whipped, even killed for disobedience. Yet slaves could earn their freedom.
Well, the crucial difference between the Roman and the American concept of slavery is the possibility of freedom in the Roman concept. And not only that, but the fact that once freed, a Roman slave becomes a citizen.
In Rome, freed slaves were often included in the family tombs of their former masters. While the lineage compounds of Teotihuacan grew through kinship, Roman households increased by adding slaves. In the process, the very definition of family changed.
For us, the word family means people related by blood, married couple, children. Now, in the Roman concept of the family, the slave is built in from the very first. The Roman word familia actually means the slaves who belong to the household more easily than it means the family united by blood. And the more I look at the houses of Pompeii, the harder it becomes to populate them with modern nuclear families. Instead, there's a glorious mishmash. People related by blood, slaves, and also freedmen who, ex-slaves, continue to live with their masters.